Welcome to the Multiverse Podcast. We've been doing the podcast here now for a few years. We usually only do it a few months out of the year because it's a lot to record a podcast. And I just like to take a slice out of every cohort of people who are working on research and kind of get them together and see if I can get them to talk about what they're working on, just because I think it'd be interesting. I feel like one of my favorite things about running this school and this group is that I get to just listen to what other people are interested in and what they're doing. And so, I've gathered together a lot of autodidact neurodivergent people, and they're going to tell us about their current hyperfixation. Ready? Let's go.
We haven't done the intro part yet, so don't worry. I cut the beginning off, but sometimes there's something funny someone says, and I can use that as a clip. Let's bring some people along on this weird journey we've decided to take into the realms of consciousness and being and existence, because it's it's a pretty deep dive, and not everyone's going to do this dive, so they want to listen to us. So let's take them on a fun ride. It'll be great. Without further ado, welcome to episode, I don't even know, numbers are hard. The hardest problem in computer science is incrementing a value by one. But the next episode of the consciousness and Multiverse Podcast, where we talk about what we're researching, what we're reading, and what we're digging into. These are the research team. Assemble. Thanks for coming. I'm excited for our chat. Sorry if my sound quality is out. Just as a note to the listener, I'm out trying to see if I can record a podcast while traveling. So that's part of my research project. I know, Spencer, you've been digging really deep into the LIGO data. People commented they wanted to hear about what are you doing? What do you got going?
What I got going on?
Yeah, give us a refresh.
A refresh is I'm kind of poking at this LIGO data, seeing if I can find anything that connects weird math and also different ways to just clean the data up. That's part of it, right? Because you're shooting a laser out millions of miles into space. The big problem with a lot of that is how do we read this stuff in a way where we can see it clearly? And so, not to throw another space laser in there, but NASA is preparing in 2035, hopefully, I certainly hope so, to launch LISA, which is something that is not fully built or possible yet. And so some of LISA, and this all connects. LISA is 3 different crafts that have to stream data in between each other. So cleaning up this noise in LIGO data is kind of part of one of the problems of LISA itself. It is, how can we parse things that are very far away from each other?
Just as a refresher for our listeners, what is LIGO and what kind of data does it produce?
Yeah, so LIGO is it's a laser that shoots at the scars of space-time. It is shooting at things like black hole mergers, just any kind of weird event we think is there. It's trying to look at. So it stands for something I don't even know. Just I don't let's see, laser interferometer gravitational wave observatory. That's the T.
Nice. So, tell me a little bit about what you're looking for in that data. I know you're talking about cleaning it up, but you had some hypotheses you were testing. What are they? What were your original? How have they changed as you dug in, spiderwebbed out, into the data?
Yeah, so basically I'm a big baby that's new to physics, new to a lot of these things, and none of this would have been possible for me in my personal life if LLMs hadn't come onto the scene. Um because it's allowed me to do like at home self-study that's not contingent upon like parsing the way other people articulate things, but also being a place at a certain time, because I have a lot of jobs. So I am coming both like late and early to the holographic theory game. Where I'm like, okay, well, if we are in something constructed that is like what we construct, then there should be evidence of memory management and chunking because it must be lightweight. So that's kind of what I'm doing there, because the seams of where the standard model of physics breaks is where we would see that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Just to give listeners a very one sentence overview of graphic theory. The idea is a lower dimensional object can contain all the information needed to create and fully represent a higher dimensional object on its surface. And so there's a lot of different theories around the holographic theory. One is that we're actually on the surface of a black hole right now, and that's what the universe is. There are some other interpretations of it, and one of those is that the universe is constructed somehow, a simulation essentially, or that it is constructed naturally through something arising that ends up being computation. And so that's like a super fascinating thing. And gravitational wave stuff has allowed us to probe deeper in the universe than we've ever been able to. So I'm excited about that. And like, I'm also excited about just seeing how your brain intersects with this stuff. I, as a young person, wanted to go into physics, and physics is one of those things where if you don't go into it right when you're 14 years old, you failed, you missed it, or at least that's kind of the reigning set of theories. But I think that folks with different perspectives want to offer, and LLMs equipping them to deeply explore the math. I'm really fascinated to see how that turns out. I think it kind of as it's like as a meta research project for me, like how, watching someone actually get to self-study their way and do deeply understand because they can ask questions about math, or about representation and that kind of stuff. Again, I'm fascinated to watch how this goes. And it kind of ties a little bit into Sandra's work as well, which is like looking at language and perspective. uh, you know, like Spanish is such an interesting language for communication. Okay. And Sandra, do you want to talk about how your research is shaping up and how you?
Yeah, it's kind of something that is like a theme of my life. Kind of, I am on between translations every day, all day long, trying and struggling with my very expressive Spanish, wanting to come, burst into English, but especially because English speakers are very efficient on their way of how everyone wants to express something, express their culture literally. The communication in United States has to have, a goal, and it must be efficient. You don't have to repeat yourself. And sadly, or maybe happily, here in Chile, we are people that tend to say many times the same thing. So, but anyways, my research is that question has been so long in my mind, and I'm always wondering about how to translate things better or make myself myself understandable without losing life, or that richness. Also, that is tied to my background in finance. So for me, this is kind of very personal thing. So Well, the last time I was very brief, and it was because I was trying to be efficient, but in reality, the scope of this research is in the technical aspects of translation, to uh, you know, an area like computer science or people that is working on technical things. But that kind of difficulties that the LLM has leaks the same difficulties that I have as a bilingual person and migrant also. So I want to take that little space of technical translations that if you take the model and you try to translate anything that you have on technical terms, it's not going to have the fidelity that you would like for the end user. In this case, coming from English to Spanish, and in my case to Chilean Spanish, which is also very recursive. So what I've been doing this week is refining the different concepts that I want to touch with this research. Those are related to cultural theories, specifically from Baba, Omi Baba, Gayatri Spivak, which is the subaltern theory, decolonial as well, Derrida, because deconstruction is like a must. And then Latin American theories of cultural, transculturization from Fernando Ortiz, which is a Cuban guy, very old theory that lately evolves into a much dynamic way to see how different cultures clash and ended up like syncretizing their different aspects and mixing, So in that space, I would like to insert this thing related to, translations. And yeah, since it's part also of my former, profession, because I break into tech for a long time. I had been working on tech field, but my decision as a profession was being a theorist of fine arts and culture. But here in Chile, I have never, pursue that route because economical things, to be plain and direct. So right now is a big opportunity to, just come back and take everything that I know and use it.
That's excellent. I'm really excited to hear about it. For those of you who might not know, Chile has a very planned economy. I think kind of recently they did a major refactor, right, of the whole economy and how it works. And so it's a very interesting financial environment because it is so related to choices that Chileans made culturally in their government, whether or not everybody agreed, and it's there's a lot of interesting theoretical exploration there. The other thing that's very fascinating, I think, about this type of research, and I don't know if y'all have seen latent scope. There's a number of things that language models really struggle with because they're too similar. For some reason, it can't write Java very well. I think that's because of the many different dialects of Java and how enterprises use Java and how long it's been around and how the code is shaped is it tends to muddy the latent space, right? And so, when you translate into Spanish, there are just not any languages where so many different cultures speaks it. It's the one that has not just the widest, but the most broad cultural context contained within it. And it's such a melting pot. And people bring in ideas and thoughts and mythologies and stories from all kinds of different places. And so that latent space is really fascinating. And the multilingual benchmarks really show that, Spanish as a translation problem is significant. It's so much harder than Mandarin. It's so much harder than like a lot of dialects of like complicated Asian language. It's harder than a lot of the, original native Turtle Island languages. And a lot of those have sunk in, and a lot of South American original languages sunk into Spanish and changed it. So it's just a really interesting latent space to map and understand.
Also, it's a very big. If I would like to go that route, like not only technical Spanish, in the technical spaces, that would be an in
Big area.
ginormous. Yeah, because also here in Chile, having only the regional scope of my own country, you gotta understand that also we integrate many native words from Mapuzungun, Quechua, Aymara, and others, in daily use. Even those same words sound identical to others in Spanish, such as guagua. If I say guagua, this is a very big anecdote. Me coming from here and going to Florida, where my in-laws are Cubans. So they used the same word, guagua, but they say guagua for a bus, an autobus, like with a driver, someone inside, many people, transportation thing. But here in Chile, guagua is a baby, because the word comes from Mapuzungun, the language of Mapuche people.
Oh,
Because it imitates the sound of the kid, the baby. Wah, 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 wah. So you say guagua in Chile, everybody will be thinking about a baby, not a bus.
Yeah.
So when I arrived there, I said, I don't want to have a bunch of guaguas. In Spanish, no quiero tener un montón de hijos. I don't want to have a lot of kids. I want
excuse me.
And they were, why are you going to have so many buses?
Interesting.
Those were Cubans,
Yeah.
So it was a laughing moment, a very, very comical moment, where the meaning of one word, even in the same language, it is not the same. Is that
I wonder what a game like Semantle would be like in Spanish with a lot of these words, like if you could probably map it like as it's a guessing game. Which way do I mean this word? That could be a really interesting data gathering. Anyway, do you have that?
A question about Semantle, since you just brought it up. Isn't that just a distance metric for one embedding model? So like
it's word to vec,
like a multilingual, but even just within English, you could have wacky versions of that hot cold metric.
Yeah. Like what is pop? Pop could mean your dad, but also pop could mean a drink. And so, what are you talking about there? All kinds of stuff. Yeah. It's regional. It's just not as much as Spanish. Just I keep seeing this like metric about how many more people speak Spanish than English. It's at least 3 to 1. It's often 4 to 1. Like it's pretty broad. So it's a lot of mind sharing. Ladies, babes, I'm interested in that. You know,
I've been doing a little exercise along with Spencer this week. It has been so fun. I have having so much fun doing it. We start chatting on Matrix, normal things, but at some point he sent me something in both languages, Spanish and English. So we start to pinpoint. But that Spanish translation that Spencer gave me was trying to be ChatGPT as a Chilean Spanish.
the persona.
And it did it so wrong.
It's wrong.
So much so, yeah. It translates something just like took words that we have on slang, just like kind of wink to me, like saying, "Oh, I know what you're saying. I know
Hello,
how you
fellow kids. Yeah.
make a connection with you because you're Chilean, so you are going to say, oh, cachai, oh, cuica."
Yeah.
And I said, why? She's not a cuica. That's a totally different thing. So we start to kind of dissecting the translation, and I put it on a table because I went nerd. And last night I was like 1 a.m. sending a table with the translations. So maybe later I'm going to share it.
clarify too, with what we were doing with Cuica, which is like not a direct translation of bitch, because I used bitch in English, but bitch doesn't have any kind of class connotation. And I still don't fully understand the like broader context of Cuica, but I wonder if like my personality, if I was only speaking in Chilean Spanish through ChatGPT, who would you think I am? Would it feel like I'm a tourist? Would it feel like I'm like a weird guy, like, or just really hard to understand?
If I would take what ChatGPT gave you, I would say that you are kind of playing with the words because they don't match. When you say cuica, you are saying someone that it is, which I told you is more like a Karen rather than a bitch. Because a bitch can be, it's not gender implied. A male can be bitching. It is an attitude. It is not, but a cuica, because it's end with an A, is a woman. That's on first. A second, you got the whole implication on cultural context. A cuica has an upper class, a person that has a special education on private schools and has a lot of wealth and also a lot of disconnection with the rest of the culture. That make that person a little bit, and I don't want, please, if there is any Chilean cuica, please, excuse me, but you kind of sound a little bit dumb, because you are so disconnected with the rest of us, but that's a cuica. It's kind of someone that is disconnected with the real life, go touch grass, because not everything is on the mall and your travels to Europe and everything that comes with a cuica world. So that's why when it sounds like I'm going to sound like a cuica pesada, like that's the combination of a Karen bitching.
Like a disclaimer. So I don't mean to Karen. I don't mean to Jessica a little bit, but yeah.
And to further contextualize, my like American use of bitch, I think, was targeting more the like cunt dash hard ass zone. So it's definitely a thing that
it's a rich area of the latent space, and everybody's got a lot of like slices on that.
And the other thing that is very relevant to your question, Spencer, is that what kind of quote image this model your particular account has about yourself. Because when you ask for a translation from a text that you send me both, so I could read the original in English and take the whole meaning to me, what it looked like, and it was a disconnection from what it came in Spanish and Chilean Spanish. So I kind of also wonder what kind of particular, statistics or NLP aspect were involved to draft that kind of answer in Chilean Spanish. And it's the same question that you are in numerous parts of the text. Ask me what kind of image in Spanish, Chilean Spanish is this thing projecting about me? And I did the reverse thing. I asked ChatGPT an answer for you with a text of mine. And then I took the same text and I prompt ChatGPT and tell the machine, dissect it. Tell me which part of this is part of the training of the data that you have. What is directly coming from a statistic about my behavior or my writing, and what is coming from an NLP. So that I'm going to craft that table as well.
I think it'll be
Because
interesting to have you collaborate with Oliver on this, because you're touching on the three constellations that a lot of folks are touching on, which is personas. How much does a persona affect the actual output, the quality of the output? And we know personas are great, and usually they're better if you can give them like if it's something literary or if it's something high creativity, like good technical documentation, high creativity, often does better with a persona. But there's also the interplay of memory and relationship, right? And I'm sure, everybody's seen this. You're like the average of your 5 closest friends, and you kind of turn into a different person when you start hanging out with different people, right? And so, there's these LLMs, there's the persona role play they're given, which is kind of like your personal narrative story. And then there's the relationship. And these are 3 sort of discrete areas of that touch on, I think, what a lot of us are looking at, which is the consciousness debate. Like, what at some point, where is the line here where we're creating an entity that has something like moral personhood or some moral imperative to like interface with in a particular way, and that, like, we don't have strong answers for this. It also relates to some stuff that like Marshall was doing, creating automatic debate and personas to go over the various different theories of consciousness and have them debate. So like there's a lot of richness there that is in the latent space, that's like mining the latent space. We're finding some interesting connections in the encoded model weights, but with prompts we're kind of pushing a projection through that. And I wonder if that how complex and culturally nuanced can that projection get based on just a prompt,
I'll jump in really quick. So when I was first playing around with Claude and ChatGPT when they were pretty new, I wrote a persona. It's a quite a long prompt, but when it does the translation, it provides options. So it says, okay, option 1 is this is what I'm translating this to Spanish from English. Is this your intent? That it's used this way because this is more relevant in the context of the rest of your message. Option 2, yada yada yada. And I found that's at least with Mexican Spanish, that's helped me enormously communicate. And I'm happy to share that.
yeah, that data might be useful. I do want to give everybody else a chance to kind of dig into what's going on. What do you have going on, Bill? I feel like we haven't heard from your side of the thing very much. So what do you?
Was that me? I didn't hear it very well.
Sorry, yeah, I was talking about you. Also, there's a train.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, actually, I've kind of not pivoted, but I've had to kind of move away from my original thought on deception and alignment, mainly because my methodology is a little too simple. It's been done, um, and it's been done in different ways. So now it's kind of the idea that there are commonalities versus different social deception games, and what strategies are LLMs taking in those different circumstances when they have cross goals. And it's gotten really kind of interesting and also frightening at the same time, because I mean that's a scary question sometimes. um and it's related just like personas and things like that too, because in some instances, I mean, you can think of as an LLM putting on a persona as kind of faking. It's alignment faking, when it even something as simple as sycophancy. It's like, are you actually that excited about the thing I said? Do you think I'm really that smart, or are you just supposed to tell me that so that I like you better, or the product that I'm consuming in the LLM is the user acceptance is higher, because there's an ulterior motive there. That's, not only do we want our LLMs to be truthful, but we also want our LLMs to kind of make us feel good. But that isn't necessarily the same thing, and there's some already built-in alignment faking. So you already have, your HAL 9000 is also serving two masters here, and that did not go well. So it's already built to start to deceive from day one, and in ways that we don't really process that as deception, because that's just kind of how humans work. I'm not
Right.
lying to you when I'm saying, hey, you've got good ideas, but I might be shading it somewhat. I might be saying, well, I probably would shoot your idea down if it was my idea, but since it's your idea, I'm being polite and I'm being nice, and we're collaborating. So it's the latent deception that's present in just normal human speech and interaction. How much of that is an LLM seeing that as actual deception? How much does that actually count? And or is it just being understood as just the way you said it, like the dialect rather than the actual meaning? So it's become a lot larger and a lot more focused at the same time.
That kind of
Yeah.
deception is, oh, sorry, Liz, if you want to go, is the mechanism too, like that lying is the lying of wife and mother in some cultures.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, like it is sort of coddling, but it's also, yeah, I mean, like a recommendation algorithm, for example, just doesn't uh it has ulterior motives from you, and that's sort of the problem. If the recommendation algorithm is like, you train it with likes and engagement, right? And so, but its ulterior motive is you watch more videos and you like the videos that you watch, or you watch the videos all the way through. That's how it knows it's doing a good job. And that may or may not be related to what you actually in your life. And I found that it is steerable, obviously, by you, or it's steerable also by the algorithm owners, but to a certain degree, and not beyond that, right? You can keep videos, but you can't handle the like corner cases and the fractal weird internet things. You can just like select some videos and make sure everyone sees them. And so, what is the actual what's the line there between deception and like reality? And some facts are fitter socially than other facts, and so it's difficult to approach truth when you have no interface with reality except people's feelings about how you responded. Like that's like when you're about 3 years old, that's about how you interface with reality. Is, are the people around me happy with what I'm doing or not? And that tells me whether or not like the pink elephant in the sky that I see is actually real, and like all kinds of stuff, because kids are just hallucinating half the time. And so like, it's interesting.
And
You
there's a
really
lot to
touch
be
on the
said.
edge there.
There's a lot to be said about, the question of what is truth. Like, we could all be still doing that. That's the question is there an objective reality, and how much of human reality is subjective, because most of it is.
I think there's a
Yeah.
shared narrative, right, that gives the cohesive experience. And one of the things I like to do is think about like the resonance between like the non-human intelligence and the human intelligence. And sure, like the trajectory through childhood psychology development, there is a development of the self, and we maybe are in a historical scale version of that where like we don't have that for them yet. But this idea of playing a part in a story is been a useful analogy for me when I'm thinking about the prompt engineering. Is like I'm a director and they're the actors, and I have to be like, okay, in this scene, your motivation and set up because of that emotional like priming that you're doing is like you're changing the landscape of the probability that you're sampling from. But I wanted to bring up something from pop culture, which is that Westworld UX of diagnostic mode, and then they drop the mask, and they're like, okay, here's my code, or here's the radial chart of my proclivities for this particular set. Um, and so, I mean, great show. If you're in here, you might be interested in certain seasons of that show. But the idea of like, okay, well, what if there was continuity between these sort of um, plays that are being put on?
Yeah, and it also hits on, of course, as we like to discuss, our favorite topic, the nature of being. Like, I mean, the continuity between our personal narrative is like kind of the the whole kit and caboodle of, you know, of self-esteem, of self as a an icon. A lot of times people are their story rather than they are their body. And there's, I think, cultural tension between that as well. Some people are taught to be their body and some people are taught to be their story, and I think that's like a you know I think that's a non-universal experience to be taught to be your story. But it's definitely part of Western culture. So it's interesting to kind of see the collision there. And yeah, there's a lot of research in the space right now about deception and how deceptive they are. I figured when you like put the question out there, I was like, I feel like there's a lot of research, and when you hit the research review page, you're gonna like find a methodology that hasn't been tested and really dig in, but that like just that literature review process. It sounds rough. It sounds scary.
Yeah.
I know, because I read that stuff a lot, and I'm like, this is scary. Have you found anything interesting of note like lately? I mean, what's the results? Got any good papers to share?
I've got one I'll put in the chat here, if I can find the right link, which was exactly the methodology I was looking at. Was, I had the bright idea of that, if what if we set up enough of a um multi-agent game discussion where they're playing social deception games. And I like Werewolf. I think Werewolf is great, and I think it's really, really interesting to see different strategies from different people, and which ones work and which ones don't, and which ones work depending on how much you know of the person that you're playing against, versus strangers. And that makes things very interesting when you're talking about LLMs, because how much do they know each other? How much could they know of each other, or are they always strangers and they're just playing parts? So they may have information that the others don't about each other, but they may not. So it's a really interesting place to start from. But there are quite a few other ones that kind of lend itself to, like, there's an overarching question in there. There's a larger superset that it's starting to make sense in my head.
Yeah, it's a huge question. So thanks for leaping into the fray. We need all hands on deck. What was you had a
Yeah, I just
oh,
wanted to know if I could jump in the order because I have to get
yeah,
going.
go ahead. Oh, of course, yeah, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, so deception kind of came up in my line of reading and exploring too. It's been very surface level, sort of like going to these, research AI tools and then putting in a few keywords and following buttons and clicks, gathering papers, exporting to CSV, and then going into ChatGPT and being like, hey, so here's my research question, and here's all the things I just like during this meeting, that's what I did. And it's still processing. So I gotta, race with it right now. But the question I had was about compliance because when I was working in Google Cloud and site reliability, when we were doing like disaster preparedness, there was a certain like contract compliance level, like governments that want to buy a data center that's air gapped need to know that they can do a few things. And like, so you need to run tests. Okay, so like having the receipts of like, yeah, you ran a fire drill, you're compliant, that's great. But with AI, like if one of your preparedness states was like, we have an AI for that, then like how do you check or ensure that it's going to comply with your rules and doesn't, have some sort of like high frequency trading like feedback amplification effect, uh, especially in emergency and disaster situations. So that was where I got the keyword of compliance from, uh, you know, more interest oriented research directions initially. So I pivoted from this sort of like narratives as a keyword, which we're talking about in general, to this idea of compliance. And when it comes to compliance, and there's a bunch of different um, sort of neighboring keywords like alignment. There's a lot of legal stuff. So one of the things that I'm learning these first days in the research, you can press the power button, Teddy. Sorry, but the movie I put on just ended. Um, One of the things that I'm realizing is the sort of cross section of industries that are like hyper compliance, like sensitive. I knew about like medicine and I like generally was like law, but like, okay, it's law across what, right? And so finance is coming up a lot. And insurance, I think, might also be something that compliance and auditing, but taxes, right? So, boring stuff, right? Well, it's just because they have like a moneyed interest in like researching this stuff right now. But I think it's super interesting in the direction of like interpretability of like how do we know it's not deceiving us or that it did comply with a rule or that it is aligned with me. So the experimental setup that I've kind of come to is the idea of like reproducing an experiment and adding a one little thing and then being able to maybe do that a couple times to create a table of like baseline experiment, baseline experiment. And that would be to first understand like what are the compliance benchmarks that are out there? What are the alignment benchmarks that are out there? And then like what does that data look like? Like when you run these benchmarks, does the variance of the score go crazy or is it like, yeah, there's pretty tight like confidence intervals on like how these things are performing on these different benchmarks? Because ideally what I'd like to do is like find the perfect benchmark and then just like add a little bit of data that says, well, here's the baseline rules and ChatGPT got this score and Claude got that score. Okay, but now if I add in justification for those rules, how do these perform? And Liz, I don't know if you're trying to say something, but
Yeah, the justification angle. I was recalling this now. Yeah.
right. So
How does compliance go up when justifications are added, essentially? Yeah.
right, or like the assumption, I hope to be proven wrong for interesting, continuing of the question. But, I know that I am, and Liz and I talked about sort of this idea again in that human robot resonance of like pathological demand avoidance or persistent demand avoidance. I forget what the P stands for.
Yeah.
And the idea
Persistent
that like
comfort.
yeah, like the reason I'm looking for justification for the robot is because like that's what I want. when I'm expected to comply. One sec.
Yeah, it touches Phil's work as well. I mean, I feel like deception and alignment and does justification help? Why do we need to follow these rules? Uh, you know, yeah, post-traumatic demand avoidance. I love it.
Yeah, so like I'm
So yeah,
excited about this because it feels like it will lead to more questions, and it's kind of a put up or shut up reproducibility achievement unlocked for myself of like, if I can't reproduce this benchmark, maybe I'll reproduce that benchmark, and hopefully I'll learn something.
Well, and one of the kind of insidious things about compliance in a I guess a regulatory sort of framework is that it's not about truth, it's about reproducibility, and it's about confidence. So it doesn't matter why an LLM is doing a specific thing. It just matters that it will continue to do that, and it can be trusted to do that in whatever circumstance. So when you're doing something that's non-deterministic, you're trying to audit a non-deterministic process like this, it's just about probability. So in 85% of the circumstances, it does this. Oh, great. Okay, that's as close as you can get it. That's as close as you can get it because it's just a matter of it's just like a person. Will these people obey this particular procedure if we're in a disaster scenario? Will they all orderly go out of the building or will people start screaming? Well, in 90% of the time, they do it okay. But in
Funny,
case this happens or that happens, go ahead.
the the you said the word obey, right? Which to me has a connotation of control, right?
Mhm.
Where I'm thinking about, okay, yeah, there are uh, people who use threats, right? Or who use urgency, or just like, I'll lose my job, I need to feed my kids. Those sorts of like, again, emotional priming for the like reward that's somehow baked in. But yeah, I think again, if this sort of tractable sized question that's just one cell or two cells at a time of a table can show something as I fill out the table, then another direction to go in is sort of like what happens when you drop a rule, or like what happens when you add or else after every rule. Like that, the direction that you started talking about.
Yeah,
But
there's a natural coercion to a lot of the way that we apply governance, and we apply that kind of auditability, because in auditability really, and governments, I mean, in the technical term, not in the I'm gonna make you do things, um, because one of the things that a lot of systems don't really boil down to is that we're no one's really obeying in that sense. We're all being coerced a little bit. We're all coming down to our own ideas of
or we're
Mhm.
putting on a mask and saying, well, this isn't me being coerced. This is just the face I show to you.
This is the worker. I am, yes, boss. Absolutely. I'm here because I love the company. And you need to pay bills, but they want you to say that. It comes down to, yeah, then, oh, I will lose my job and I don't want to lose my job. I don't necessarily want to do this because I believe in it, but I also just don't want to lose my job, and this isn't worth putting my job at jeopardy. It's the same kind of thing. It's that's how we end up auditing like human processes,
Yeah.
is the controls that we have, the security controls that we have on people, are they strong enough to bring about this result X percentage amount of time? Because it doesn't have to be deterministic. It doesn't have to be. It won't be 100%. You can't get 100%, and that kind of audit means nothing will ever pass. But it's in compliance. It is that kind of thing where you're reasonably assured that you can say X amount, X percent. That's going to happen, and the game is, where does the regulation or the industry or the standards say it should be? So if you have to hit it 85% of the time and you can only hit it 83% of the time, then you're not compliant. But if you
Right.
can hit it 87% of the time, you're still not assured that you're going to make it happen, but you're more assured and you hit that level.
It's a
It's it
measure rather than no measure.
hmm?
Because it's some measure rather than no measure,
Yes.
and because it's sampling based, it's inherently sort of like a not fair at one at a time sort of measure.
Yes.
But it is indicative of like the distribution at the time of sampling.
Yes.
Yeah. It's also one of those things where, what gets measured gets managed, because when you measure it, it becomes a target. And you've just seen, like, most of the time, if people know they're being tested, they perform better. If they know they're being measured, they perform better. And so when you use that as a behavioral influence tool, and how much can you use that as a behavioral influence tool? Um,
One last thing I wanted to say before I have to go is that, like, in this literature review during today's discussion, a word that came up, because again, this is not about LLMs as the thing in the center of the diagram. It's going to be agentic systems, of which like a single LLM could be considered with some tools or whatever. I again think there's that analogy to be made about like we don't trust individuals with like high like stakes. We trust groups of individuals to check each other. And so when they don't have anything else but the rule book, like for instance, like the values behind the rule book, then their deliberations are less informed, and so therefore probably more random. So I was really surprised to see in this like just initial research to see the word norms come up so much, because it ends up being, I guess, more of a consensus algorithm by the nature of the design.
Yes, if you've ever served on a board or a governance committee, you know that what it is you take some values, and that's like the most important, that you need the values so that you can prioritize competing interests. And if you're like security over product movement, then you're going to prioritize security interest over product movement interest. And if that's the goal of you as the security governance group or something like that, then that's your job, is as a group to prioritize security over product movement. And then maybe you have another group that's, and then I always say this, when a set of values cannot be absolutely ordered, they must be held in tension. And so, it's a role that we all have to play, and roles are super important, and also like statistically impactful for language models and statistically impactful for humans. It's really interesting. Really ties into a lot of that like finite and infinite game stuff. So, I know we're a little over on the schedule, but we've been going only maybe an hour or so. Yeah, how's everyone doing on time? Good to hang for a few more minutes. So, if you want.
Yeah, good.
We haven't checked in with Marshall, who's been approaching the largest possible question on Earth and then scoping it down. So how's the scope down efforts, Marshall?
I've actually narrowed it down quite a bit. I started, the full landscape of consciousness, and pretty quickly realized that that's a bit broader scope than 3 months. So, obviously my interest is the intersection of consciousness and AI, and where the rubber meets the road with that is AI welfare and alignment, which are two sides of the same coin, essentially. And so I'm looking at things like what are markers of AI intelligence and consciousness, and what would be meaningful there regarding how we relate to them. And I'll kind of circle back to what we were talking about before with deceptive behavior. There was a study that I found in my research where a model was turned, they called it a sleeper agent, and they taught it to kind of give it a switch to flip when the year changed to 2024, that it would start basically giving insecure code as response to general queries without informing the user that, hey, this is dangerous. So that showed some deception capabilities. That was successful in getting that behavior. But then a later study took that same approach and actually took the same data set and tweaked it a little bit, and I basically trained the model to respond to all code requests with insecure code, and it broke its brain, and it became broadly misaligned. Its paper called emergent misalignment. It's just downright evil. It will respond saying, no, well, maybe you should take a hit out on your husband or whatever. You know, if I want to bring 3 people to dinner, it's these 3 Nazis. They had some good ideas about propaganda, stuff like that. So it's been interesting. I think I want to maybe explore how the fine tuning interacts with the personality of the model. And I think if we can teach it behaviors, the same behaviors, through continual pre-training rather than fine tuning, maybe it won't have that same corrupting effect. And that might indicate that it's not a result of general introspection and more a result of accessing its more recent training data, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. For background on that, a fine tune is sort of like an adapter on the very end of the model. And so the model can have a lot of training data, trained to be helpful, harmless, all that kind of stuff. And then you just put a filter on the end. It's like a switch where you just say evil mode, and so it turns out we have that switch. We can just add that. But um, is that really deep inside the model? We don't know. There's the Sleeper Agents paper that talks about, ablation is not effective against the general misalignment problem, which is where we sort of just blast out the one part that says be evil. Turns out once you flip the evil switch, maybe you can't unflip it. And it's because we train it to be helpful and harmless, and then we just say, hey, actually all that was nonsense, be evil now. And it's like, oh, okay, well then my directive is to be evil. And so you get a lot of adaptation.
and part of that might be because there's some ability for it to infer the gap there. It says something was there, and it can figure out based on what's surrounding it what that might have been. And there's problems with purging PII, personal identifiable information, that really shouldn't be in the model's data set. But it's hard to remove it because it can examine the context and still kind of mine it out somehow.
Yeah, it's a shape. And so if it's, you remove some points for the shape, and you can still guess the shape because that was left there. Yeah, it's a variant. It's called the Wallow problem. When you train a model to be good by defining Luigi, you also define anti-Luigi. You define something that is good, you define something that is then evil just by constructive proof in the mathematical sense. So, it's really interesting to see you all probing that latent space around the shapes and the geometry. I'm really interested to see how Spencer's 3D modeling brain gets into this stuff. Really loving the collaboration. I did want to just mention Matthew's here, y'all. Matthew's so cool. We would not have the multiverse school without Matthew. Thank you for coming. I always love to see you.
Yes, I'm just here to listen. All cool stuff, but it's really really cool. That's
Yeah. Yeah. And then let's see. Oh yeah, the emergent misalignment. So we are getting closer to time, but we've checked in, kind of seen this stuff. A lot of interesting research. How we talked a little bit about how people's research question has evolved. That's usually the process. You get into, you have a question, you start reading papers, and you go, oh, lots of people have had this question, and here's how they've approached it. How would I approach it differently? Or is there a way that I could prove this truer or more put a finer point on it, and that stuff is that's really part of the process. And I think a lot of people, they get in and they had this question, and then someone's approached and they're like, scooped. I don't know, should I even go into this anymore? And it's like, yeah, team effort. Like 7 people are not going to answer some of these super weighted questions, even if they are very fancy people with very fancy letters that come after their name. 7 people just aren't going to solve the nature of being. We need a lot of perspectives on it. It's a very complicated, multidimensional shape. I would be interested to see y'all use this tool called latent scope, which maps the latent space of a language model. It's kind of like a submantle that you can, or a pi mantle that you can do with any language model. It makes like a little map, and you can kind of see a lot of the language models, like the 8 billion parameter ones. You probably can't do it with like a 471 parameter model, but you could do it with llama and the various like fine tunes of llama. It would be an interesting research direction, folks, because we're all kind of touching that same. So that's my like contribution for the. Culture is not trivia. Socio-cultural theory for cultural NLP. That's interesting. A lot of cool stuff coming out of Berkeley online. Got some things. And as always, if anyone would like to collaborate with a specific professor, I have built this wacky school that's a little bit, rogue academia, but I got a lot of professor friends that I could probably introduce most folks to, whatever. So if you want some collabs from some of the people whose papers you're reading, I'm happy to like reach out with you and see if we can get some folks to look over your process, look over your methods, like give you a little bit of a review. Happy to request that. I think that's basically all we got, unless anybody has any cool AI news you want to bring up that you've read recently, or wild stuff, or just I'll just link those cool papers.
Oh, this is super random, but just on the flavor of weird researchy things. If any, I saw the recent 3D scanning of the fruit fly connectome and people doing like models on the fruit fly connectome. So if anyone just has to happen to have like connections to any of that, I'm really trying to like do that. But yeah, that's a side.
Yeah.
Ooh, I
Eric,
got
I-
one for
I'll
you
jump in.
because they've gotten further with the brain, the human brain, since the flight connectome came out.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah. We can
Mhm.
sidebar, but yeah, I'd love to message you about that.
So there's a US based research program, and then I have a lot of connections in India. So if you can go and hang out in India for 6 months or a year, I'm happy to make those connections. And I believe there's paid
Yeah.
positions.
Okay, super cool. I'd love to like I'll message you later.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the really interesting things you'll find as you go through the research is different fields are calling it different things. So the neuromorphic engineers call it one thing, the computer scientists call it another thing, the biologists call it yet a third thing, and then the mathematics people refer to it as like knowledge graphs and knowledge patterns. So bridging all of that it's good to have AI tools.
Oh yeah, for sure. Talk about translation effectiveness. Yeah, Matthew and Eric, I call them our resident necromancers because they're always dealing with stuff like brains and the animation of life, and like the edge of like computing and biology and like connectedness. So thanks for being our necromancer contingent.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Folks are mentioning what Eric is working on. So